Well, my friends, it's been 1 second for you, but 2 weeks for me, probably. Back on this thing, and I'm ready to start doing some of the fancy work. And this is what I'm telling you is where all the work starts. Up to this point, this is like a piece of cake. Now it gets hard, and here we go. It also gets hard because I'm making it hard. And how am I making it hard? Well, I want to inlay purfling like this around the top. This is abalone shell purfling. I want this to go all the way around the top perimeter on the inside. And of course, you got to have a border on the inside of that. So then I've got this, I'm going to use this binding that John Manura, this is actually purfling that John Manura sent me. And this is Paduke, Yellow Heart Paduke. So I want to put that on the inside, put the purfling, and then go to the outside with this binding that I made using the AccuSlice. This is the curly maple binding with walnut and with sycamore. So I'm going to have this thing all mixed up. There's going to be every kind of wood on the planet in this thing before I'm done. But, you know, in order to do all of that, you got to do some very, very precise routing. You know, like routing the slot around the outside edge. I mean, it's not easy, but that's not the hard part. The hard part is getting this purfling cut perfectly. So I've made myself up just this little board here that I can use to set my purfling cutter. So if you don't know what a purfling cutter is, this is what you use on a violin to cut that little decorative purfling around the inside edge of the violin there on the top and the back. And it's got a little pointy blade there that maybe you can see. Very sharp little pointy blade right there. And this thing here is what you use to line up on the side like this. So you hold it like so and you drag it around there and you you make a little slice in the wood. You only get one good shot at this. I mean, you can do it again, I guess, but it's kind of hard. You want to try to make sure you get it on the first try. So you got to have that little cutter set at the right distance from this post. And you can adjust that with these screws. There's little adjustment screws right here on both sides, so you can move that blade in and out. So I haven't checked it yet. I'm going to check it right now. I need it at, I've already measured each thing. The outer maple binding is 0.078 thousandths. The abalone is 0.062 thousandths. The purfling is 0.048 thousandths. So the total is 0.188. So I have just made a quick attempt at setting this at 0.188. Now I'm going to cut on this board here as just a practice board and see if it cuts it at 0.188. And I'm just making a little slice right there. I don't even know if it'll show up on camera. It's just a little tiny slice in the wood. I'm turning it different directions. Maybe you can see it. That little slice right there. And now I'm going to measure it precisely with this and see what it measures. All right, this is on 0, so I'm going to just bring this in until I figure I'm on that slice. That's 0.179. 0.188 is what I wanted. So we're real close. And actually you could debate that that's right on the money. I mean, it's really hard to get that accurate when you're down to that last thousandths. Well, my friends, believe it or not, the camera shut off on me and a whole nother day has gone by. So I was showing you in the last clip how I was measuring that little slit there, that width, and that I could argue and say that it really is right on the money. Well, I've since done some just lining up manually with the actual material and laid it on there, and it looks right to me. So I'm just going to go with how I have this set. Yeah, that's what I'm going to do. Now my question is order of operations. And it's, you know, you just have to understand that you can do most of these things in any order. Not all of them, some of them really matter. In this case, I think it would make more sense to make this line all the way around this top before I route the binding slot. And the reason is because this could tip in a little bit if I have that binding slot there. Now, the other side of the coin is that I have to make sure this top doesn't protrude out past the side anywhere. Otherwise, it's going to push it the opposite way. So, you know, you really have to make sure your top and your sides are pretty close before you start this. This is the old school way to do it. I'm sure there's somebody out there that would do this with some sort of a router or something. I'm kind of old school, so I'm gonna give this my best shot. Here we go. Well, off camera, I took and scraped this edge with a razor blade to clean it up because there was a little bit of glue, a little bit of anything and everything. So now I'm gonna sand this edge, just trying to, you know, give myself the best chance of dragging this tool around here and not having a problem. Because let me tell you something, you know, this really does work well, but that little tiny sharp point catches the grain of the wood and it pulls you one way or the other, and you just don't want anything else interfering because it's hard enough to just keep the point going where it needs to go, let alone anything else that could be bumping you. So this, I really am taking a little extra time to try to give myself the best chance of success. Ask me how I know that this can happen, that things like this can throw you off. I mean, they definitely can throw you off, so you really can't get in any hurry on this kind of thing. As we speak, my brother's building a left-handed Martin style dreadnought guitar. Of course, it's a little fancier than that. He's learning that all this detail work is where all the work is too. Building the instrument is a piece of cake. I'm seriously telling you, I know you think I'm just making that up. Building the instrument is like, almost like a baby toy. Putting all this detail in it, it's like rocket science. It's completely different. Believe what you want, it's completely different. This is where all the work is. I know I've said it many times before. It probably sounds like a broken record to you. You can ask my brother if you don't believe me, because he's learning the hard way. Right now, what I'm doing here right now is the end of this is probably a little bit proud to the side, so I'm just taking a file to it here just to, because a file will cut it off easier than about anything, really. Okay, that's probably as good as I'm going to get it. Well, actually, as I say that, I see little bitty minor details here. I've stalled all I can, so here we go. Again, I'm going to say to it one more time so you see what the force is that I'm working against. This little tiny blade, you know, it's just like any blade you put in wood. You start pulling it, and as that grain changes, the knife wants to follow the grain or, you know, something. It always wants to do something that you don't want it to do. So you really have to pay attention the whole time. So my first cut, I'm going to try to do extremely light. Just enough to make a little tiny mark. Hardly any cutting at all. And then the next time I go through it, I'll try to cut, you know, a little bit deeper, and I'll go around this maybe 3 or 4 times, and hopefully it'll finally get there. Like as I'm going right here right now, these grain lines are running this way, and every one of them I cross I can feel, because they're hard, and you can feel every one of them. In fact, this thing bounces up over it and goes back down into the softwood. That'll give you some idea. This is not a simple project here. And if I could do it with a router, I would. But honestly, I don't know how I could do this with a router very easily. I'm sure I could build something to make it work, but with all the curves and all the roundness and everything, this is probably the easiest way to do it. And this, having said that, this is not easy. Very light touch, and every single grain line shows up, every one of them. I'm going to go back over this one 2 or 3 times just in the same place. I'm really pushing hard with this hand here to keep it straight and square. Give you a close-up of that maybe you can see the little line it's starting to score there. You don't have to go real deep because we're only gonna, this purfling is only, well, let's just see how thick it is. I don't even know, it's not very thick. I'm gonna say it's about 40 or 50 thousandths. It's 52 thousandths. So, you know, we only need to skim off the little top layer of this. So you don't have to go very deep. But I'm going to go one more time around it. 3 cuts per section, or 3 traces per section to get it deep enough, I hope. We'll do it. I'm hoping it'll do it. That actually turned out pretty good, so I'm going to move on to the next section. I'll show you what it looks like when I get it finished. Well, I believe I finished the top. You can see the line all the way around and how it follows and then gets up into this detail here and all around here. It's been cut everywhere. So that score line is there. That's all I'm going to do for now. The next thing I'm going to do is route out the binding slot and get the binding slot as clean as I can get it. And then we'll see where we go from there. I have this router set up with this one of these cutters. I'm not crazy about these cutters. I have some 2 flute carbide teeth ones, but the problem with the 2 teeth is that they can sometimes knock out big chunks, and I really don't like the 2 teeth either. But these are not much better. There just should be a better cutter for binding slots. This is all we got to work with, so it's what I got to use. Anyway, I'm going to give it a test cut on this piece of cedar here, and I just want to check that it's going to be the right depth and thickness and everything for this. And of course, we always want to power it up first. Some people could probably do this without plugging their router in, but I can't. I have to plug it in. It's not really deep enough. I need for it to be a little bit deeper cut. I'm going to go back over it without adjusting it first. It's right on the money now. I'm going to give it a shot. We'll see what happens. I hope you're with me on this one, because this is where you can make some major mess ups. I'm just going to start anywhere here. Actually, I'm going to start purposely here because I want to this pulls the grain towards me, and that's the way this cutter's going. That would be the easiest cut to make. So I'm going to give it a shot and see how it goes.
From where I stand, I can see all the lights of the city.
Well, that seems to be working. I cut that 2 or 3 times, and when I lay this binding on here, it's pretty darn flush with the edge. It needs to be pretty close. I can't, afford to scrape much off of this because it's really close to the final size that I need. I'm going to go ahead and go with that. We're definitely not too deep. It may be that I'll come back and do a fine adjustment and make it a little bit deeper. But right now I'm just going to go ahead and do this whole thing. I'll do it off camera. And it does seem like it's working. You can see after cutting that it narrowed down that little cut that I made, the first little cut on the top. And I just checked that also to see if it was about the right thickness for this purfling and for the other binding. And it appears to be close. This just isn't easy. That's all I can tell you. You just have to do your best you can with this and just go for it. And that's what we're doing. I've got the binding slot cut most of the way that I can. You can't really cut it up around here. You pretty much have to do that by hand or some other method. I've got a lot of hand work to do now, and I'll show you some of that. But first thing I'm actually going to do, because the top itself isn't perfectly thicknessed all the way around. In other words, it's pretty close, but it's not perfect. And so it leaves a little bit of a little bit of the top on the sides here because I cut it a little shallow. So I'm going to go around with an X-Acto knife and very carefully cut all this down so that just the top of the side is exposed all the way around. I'm not worried about the fact that the top is uneven thickness all the way around because that outer edge is, you know, just kind of the way it is. When I put the binding on there and match it up to the sides, then I'll cut the top down even to the top of the binding. So that way it'll all be perfect. It's just a process and you just got to go through it. I've taken a sharpened X-Acto knife and I actually sharpen it on my stone. There's just a real thin layer of spruce sitting on top of the side here, just because the top's a little thicker than the binding. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to cut that little spruce off right to the top of the sides there, and I'm going to use this really sharp little 1/4-inch chisel. I'm going to do most all of that off camera. I just thought I'd just show you just a very little bit of it there. You can just see how I'm peeling up little pieces of it. And that's all we're going to do. Well, my friends, I've got this shelf cleaned off all the way around. And now I'm turning my attention to doing the detail up in here. You can see I've drawn some pencil lines. And pretty much this whole thing has to be routed, either routed or just cut by hand. This thing doesn't really work up in here because of the steep angle of these things. It would work a little bit, and I might even use it a little bit. But the problem with even using it at all is that this thing here rubs on the wood and actually makes a dent in the wood. So, I don't know, probably just do it all totally by hand with this. And yeah, this is the one thing where your results may vary.
For one man to love one woman so much it's a pity. From where I stand I can see the cantina she goes to.
Well, my friends, I have spent quite a bit of time routing all this out. I've got it all routed out by hand here. And for the most part, what I did was I just took a bit something like that and held it in my hand. By the way, if you're wondering where this green thing came from, this was one I had bought for Caleb a while back when Caleb was here, and it basically matches my Dremel. The difference is, on a scale of 1 to 10, if this is a 10, I'd give this about an 8. It's pretty good. It's not quite like this. Even though it says it goes to 35,000 RPMs like this one, I would say this one's getting around 25,000. It's good. It's good enough. It keeps me from having to switch back and forth because I want to keep this bit in here until I'm done with it, so I can at least use this one for the handwork. Anyway, the point is I've got most all of that routed out on the top. I haven't done the back yet. I need to also route out that little shelf where the shell is going to set, and that's that extra little line you can see in there. So all of this has to be hand routed. I cannot really do it with a Dremel tool or a router because everything's misshapen. There's no flat, even surface. I could sort of make something to work off of the side, but it's difficult to keep your up and down depth because, again, everything is, different shaped. Anyway, the point is I got a lot of work to do yet, and for the most part, I'm really just doing it by hand. I'm basically just cutting it under here like this. I mean, it's just a very slow, tedious process. I've got it cut, and then I just have to get that wood out of there, and so it's just like that. You just take your time and cut it out, and you can't, you just have to kind of eyeball how deep you are because there's nothing to really give you a depth. Every so often you just need to put your pieces in there, like that piece of shell. I'll set it in there, make sure I'm not going too deep. But I got to do that all the way around. It's just going to be a lot of fun.
Where she's not supposed to, but goes anyway. From where I stand I can hear the music and laughter. Carmilla tells me money, that's what her young heart is after.
I've got the shelf cut out most of the way around, not all the way, but now I'm getting up here to this area where it's going to be a lot more detailed. But maybe you can see that the shelf is actually cut up to a certain point there, the little shelf on top. And I'm trying to get it cut around here now. Now this gets tricky because this is at an angle, so I'm going to have to go from a flat shelf basically to a kind of an angled shelf around here. Not sure even how well this is going to cut. I just got done sharpening this little chisel. I think it might be better for this. You just have to peel a little bit away at a time and hope you don't grab anything that knocks out a big chunk. Going to be very tedious. I'll show you as I make more progress. Well, I've spent quite a bit of time working on this detail, and quite honestly, I don't know if I'm there yet or not. I probably won't know till I start actually doing the abalone inlay and the purfling on the top. But before I get to that, I want to go ahead and at least knock out most of the back too in terms of the binding slots. So I'm going to go ahead and turn my attention to that. You know, you can see right now that it's not been cut at all, and I'll show you what it looks like after I cut it. I'll be cutting it with the same tool here, just like so.
I see you differently, I see you there with a man. Carmilla is lying a seed from where I stand.
Friends, another weekend has passed on the Mandolin. I spent most of last week, when I had time to work on this, I spent it all on trying to perfect all these channels. Are they perfect? Probably not. You almost always find all kinds of problems when you start putting the binding in there. But it's about as perfect as I can get it for right now. I've got this little tiny purfling. I also thicknessed it, or I don't know if you want to call it thicknessed or height, cut the height down to where it's just, well, it's about as low as I can cut it and do it accurately. So it's still pretty tall for this channel because it doesn't need much, but it's about as small as I can get it. There's always ways to do more, but it's just like at some point you got to cut your losses. So I'm going to try bending this first curve right here. I figure this is going to be one of my hardest bends, and I'm going to try bending this purfling around this and get it all the way over to this point here. That's the longest piece, and it's the worst curve. So let's see what happens. I moved my side bender over here just because it would be easier for me right now. I'll zoom in on that and maybe you can see it. All right, so it's up to temperature, or very close. We'll just start by putting a little water on the end of this purfling to soften it up. In this case, dipping it would probably be better on some of this, but it's just what I have available. It'd be really nice if I had a real thin piece of aluminum that I could put around this. Maybe I'll pause and see if I can find something that'll help me back this up to bend it, because that would be helpful. Well, here's a little piece of RSW history. This little piece of tin I cut out of a tin can years and years and years ago. It's been with me since my very first mandolin. Maybe I didn't think of this on the first mandolin, but it's been there since the second mandolin for sure. Anyway, it's been there a long time. I don't use it anymore just because I've got, better material now. But it would be really good for doing this fine purfling, I think. So I think I'm going to try cutting it up. The question is, do I want to go in the other room and get the metal shears? I guess I will, rather than use my shop scissors. I'm afraid I'll dull these up really bad. Well, here we go, cutting up a piece of history. Kind of hate to do it in a way, but in another way I think I kind of need to. Trying to decide how much of it I need to bend around this, because it needs to be small and light. That little bit there hopefully will be flexible enough to help me bend this. Got some water here. This water's got a little bit of glue in it, but I don't think that's going to make much difference. I'm just going to wet this end of this down and see if now I can pull this around this bend. Got a pretty good bend in it, but going to need more than that. Let's see if it fits the bend. So it has to fit this curve right here. It kind of seems like it does that. It does look like it cracked just the least little bit right there on the back side on the inside edge, but I don't think that'll be noticeable. And now I just need to bend the whole thing around to this. I'm not even sure the best way to try to do that. I think I'm just going to try to bend this by hand, long curving bend, and just keep sweeping it on here. It may eventually bend if I do it long enough. These long subtle bends are sometimes in a way more difficult because you're just trying to get it to hold that shape, and they don't like to hold that long subtle shape. They like to just straighten back out. Well, that may work at least well enough. It may not be the best, but it may work well enough. And hold that one in place. And can I get this bent around here? What I might do is just, because this is a really long piece, I think I'll just cut it off a little extra long here. And now it's a little easier to work with. I'll go back and try doing some more bending on that. Yeah, I tried doing a little more bending on it, and quite honestly, it just doesn't want to hold the shape. This is not going to be easy, I'll just tell you right up front, because I don't know a good easy way to keep this in there. You know, you could try to do it all at once, but on this thing, as tight as these curves are and everything, doing it all at once, I don't think is a good idea. I've done that on guitars a lot, but on this, because of all the funkiness, I really think I better try to do a little bit at a time and make it work. The other thing about this, and this will be hard to explain, using this tool, when you're cutting this, I think it cut in a little deeper, and so this shelf, this outside shelf here, or this top shelf I should say, is not quite as wide as I had intended it to be, but I do think it's the right width overall. When you put all three things here, like if I had this purfling, then the abalone, and then this outside binding, I think it works out to the right width. But the problem is, I do think the side of the outside binding slot has tapered in slightly. So that makes this shelf a little small, if that makes sense to you. I hope it does. My problem is, when I get this in here, I don't have a very big shelf to put my abalone on, and my abalone is going to stick out a little bit. But it'll come back and be perfectly straight with this, I think. I don't know. I really am just confused. It's going to be difficult at best. I'm going to work on this a little bit off camera here and try to get my head wrapped around this whole problem, because it's just not very easy. Quite honestly, I still haven't figured out how I'm going to hold this in there and get it glued up tight right at the moment. I kind of have an idea, but I think I'm going to turn my attention to just bending the rest of the pieces, because I've got the bending iron hot and I might as well get the bending done first. I think I'll bend the next longest piece here. That'll be this piece here, and we'll do that now. Because this is so tedious bending all this, I'm not going to film the rest of it. You can't really see what I'm doing anyway, but I'll show you the final result. Well, I've got them all rough bent, and that's, when I say rough, I'm pretty much meaning exactly what I say. They have the general idea to be in the shape they're supposed to be in, but they're not perfect. I think I can force them into their shape and make them submit, but quite honestly, it's going to be a challenge. So we'll see how all that goes. Here's the technique I'm using right now, and I'm just doing it dry right now. I'm not even trying to glue it. I'll probably just run CA glue over this if I think it's working. Quite honestly, it's pretty good. There's a place or two it's not quite as tight as I would like. It may be that I'll have to just push that place in whenever I CA glue it and just force it into place. It's sort of working and sort of not. Of course, the trick of it is, do I still have enough room to put these pieces of purfling in there? And quite honestly, it looks like it's going to be very tight. And of course, there's not a chance of opening that on camera. I have one little piece that's loose there that I can use for my gauge. That would work, except I can't get it in there. You know, I think it's actually going to probably work. You know, you always want better, but I think it's going to kind of work. It's just barely going to work, but I think it's going to work. We'll see. Well, I'm going to attempt to lock this into place with some CA glue. Might be a mistake, because I don't know. It's just really difficult to be satisfied with this. No matter how good you get it, you always want it better, and that's the bottom line. Problem is, you just can't hold it, and you just need 3 hands. It seemed like it worked pretty well. I'm gonna pull out these upper pins here. They looks pretty good. The only negative of using these pins is they are, you know, fairly flimsy, and they do bend fairly easy, so you just, I don't know. Just gotta take the good with the bad. They're small and skinny, and that's what you need. Try to just work my way back around here a little further. Try to pin it about every 1/4 inch so that it's really tight up against there. I try to work the pin in so that as the pin goes in, it's really forcing the purfling tighter. You have to be a little careful about that, because if you get much of an angle on your pin, it'll lift the purfling up. And I'm trying not to let that happen. I think I'm just going to work in short bursts like this. Just glue it as I go, because I don't see how I could do the whole thing. I'm going to just work from right up here where I was to about there. Just going to show this last little section here, and then I'm going to do the rest off camera. It just eats up so much footage. You know, you think, what does that matter? It's digital. Well, it matters because I don't have the storage space on my computers most of the time. Then, in addition, we have to go through that whole footage to, you know, to see what's in there, and when we're making the video, and it just eats up our time. It's just not a good thing to have just extra footage. If you were shooting a documentary, that might be different, but when you're doing something like this, it eats your lunch having too much footage. Boy, this is just not the simplest thing. Trying to hold it in there as tight as I can hold it. Give you a close-up of it, what I've done so far there, and how that's going, and now I'm going to do the rest off camera. I have that on there and am pretty satisfied with the way it went on. You know, this little shelf is just scaring me because it's so tiny. You know, I've got to get that shell to adhere to that shelf, and then I, you know, get that all smooth, and then I got to put the outside binding on it. Because of all of that, I kind of think I'm going to do it, you know, do all of this section and get it finished, because, you know, after doing, I don't want to do all of this and find out that, hey, this is not fitting very well. I would prefer to just do one thing and finish it all the way, but I just have a feeling if I did that, I'd find out at the end, oh, this doesn't fit, you know. It's more efficient to just do one thing, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do, and I think this is what I have to do. So I think before I put that shell in there, I'm going to trim this down to the proper height. I've got my little 8mm plane that one of my wonderful viewers just sent me, and it's just awesome. I really like it. I don't know why I didn't have one of these earlier. I should have bought one of these 30 years ago or 40 years ago. Just never thought it would be that handy, and then, you know, after all these years of experience, it dawned on me that it really would be very handy to have one of these little things. So if you're planning to do this type of work, I've always talked about my 10 millimeter, but I would now for sure get an 8 millimeter also. The 10 millimeter is great for the carving, and this one would be fine for carving too, but especially in the detail carving areas. And like things like this where you're very close to the wood and your purfling is just needed to be trimmed back, it's just the perfect tool. You can see I'm pretty much just getting the purfling there when I trim it. You can be very accurate, very precise with these things when you learn how to use them. Looks like right here, it might not be tight. I'm not, and it's loose. How did that happen? Just crazy. Just really hard to deal with this stuff. Now, I don't know if I can get that back in there and get it to stay or not. Really nice if I had that third hand right now. Lots and lots of detail in something like this. It's very, very hard to do. This type of work can be done a lot of different ways. The one thing you don't want to do is cut anything short. I'm just looking at this, and I'm going to pinch it off extra long there, I think. And then I'm going to just try to take this sharp chisel, which I just sharpened it again, and I'm going to just try to eat away at it very slowly. Again, it's that old sneak up on it approach that I always do. You can definitely do this much faster by just taking a big cut and doing it, but you can't change the way it's looking if you do that. You know, it's better to just take it really slow and look at each cut and see if it's at the right direction, right angle, you know, because there's a bunch of angles to all these things, especially when you're going around these hills. Like this is starting to climb this hill here, not to mention this curve. That's still a little bit long, but it looks real good otherwise. Otherwise, it's just a hair long. So a hair long is always good. Leave something a hair long, you can always trim it off. So when I get ready to put the next piece up to it, I can always trim it. I think I'm going to, stop that, and I'm going to work on this shell now. Boy, I'm kind of dreading the shell thing, I got to be honest. This piece here, this is a straight spot right there, and I think I'm just going to go ahead and put that piece in place, kind of. The trick of this, I think, is going to be cleaning this binding up too, because again, with the sticking the pins in there, that kind of ruffled it a little bit, and the glue itself sneaks up on those pins and makes little bumps. That glue runs everywhere. These are the kinds of little detail-y things that I've learned to do over the years. You know, in the past, I would have just started gluing it on there. But now I know better, and I know to clean this up. Even though it looks clean to your eye, it's not that clean. And that glue runs everywhere and makes a little bit of a mess, and that will hold it out just enough to make a little crack. And those little cracks kind of show up to your eye sometimes. So anyway, here we go. Still not exactly flush, I don't think. If you have to, you can always sand the edge of your piece a little bit if you're seeing something sticking out there or something. And I'm just cleaning it up in case there's something stuck on the edge of it there. It looks pretty tight, but quite honestly, it's not absolutely tight. I don't know why though. Maybe it's just an optical illusion. I think it is. I think it's fine. I'm trying to make up my mind on how I want to do this. Just hold one little piece in place and glue it. And it's just, I don't know. It just runs everywhere. It just runs everywhere. And yeah, you could use a smaller thing, but it just runs everywhere. It's just annoying. Before I even try another piece, I'm going to lay my binding up here now and see what that kind of looks like. And I'll try to give you a look at that too. So there's kind of what it looks like. It's looking pretty good. I'm looking at it, and I'm also looking at it like across this way, and I'm looking flat across here, and that looks flat. It looks perfect. It really does actually look perfect. So, you know, if something's that good, you might as well just go with it. From this point forward, I'm not going to show a whole lot of this probably. I'm going to use these curved pieces because this is slightly curved. If you use a straight piece, the ends of it are off. Now, what I think might be a problem though, is that even with these curved pieces, these curves may be too small. It may be that the ends touch, but there'll be a gap in the middle. So what I'll probably end up having to do is break each one of these pieces a little bit and kind of cheat it a little bit. Yep, that's exactly what the problem is. When I look at this right now, I don't know if you can see it. These are all taped together, by the way, but maybe you can see the detail there. When you put that up there, it leaves a little gap in the middle. So it's not just as simple as just sticking these on here. I wish it was. I've done this before, so it's not my first rodeo. What I think I'll have to do is just break them in half and kind of cheat the difference there. Even when you break them in half, they won't be perfect, but I don't think it'll be noticeable. So what you do is you take a nipper like this or a different kind of nipper, either one, something, and you just grab about halfway through it and you cut it in half. And of course it fell out. It didn't fall inside. I could have swore it fell inside. That's my typical luck. Yeah, that looks much better. It didn't have a big gap before, and of course that splits the gap in half, where it's a tiny, tiny gap now. Now, what I'll do, just to even make that a little bit better, is I'll get me a block of wood here and a sander type thing, and I'll just touch these corners just a little bit. I mean, I don't want to sand them very much. I just want to touch them a little bit, just to knock the highs of the corners off just a little bit, and then they'll fit even better, and you really don't see any gap at all then. And I'll have to hold it here, glue it in place. There you can see what it looks like now that we got two of them there. And then what I have to do on this also, by the way, is I'll come back around with a flat file and I'll actually sand the edges of this, because the glue gets on there and that joint won't be perfect, but this will file those edges perfect then, so that when we put a longer piece of binding on here, it will match up flush to them. And so far so good. So I'm going to continue with that process for a long way around here. And I'll show you what it looks like when I'm finished with that. This probably amounts to about an hour's worth of work, honestly, from here to here, putting those in there. It's not quite as easy as it might seem like, because you have to, these are hard pieces of shell and they don't bend, they don't flex. You got to shape them so that the ends meet up. These are little tiny pieces. I mean, like, they're just little pieces. That's a piece, there's a piece, there's a piece, there's a piece. I mean, like, they're just little tiny pieces. And that's the only way you can get them to fit up and go around that circle. It's kind of like laying bricks. It really is. When you try to lay bricks around a circle, the ends don't meet up. They do that. So you have to bevel them off and you have to make them meet up. Otherwise, you're going to have big holes in here, and it ain't going to look real pretty. It just takes time. I do it with, I bevel it off with files. I put them right on the edge here and then file the ends of them off. I sometimes use a piece of sandpaper laying here on the table. It just depends on what the issue is. They come out longer, and it would be really fast if you could just lay these long pieces around here, but these long pieces are meant to go around a sound hole. Now, I could use short, straight pieces, but I'd even have to shorten them up even more and do a lot more beveling. And sometimes the straight pieces are the easiest ones to use on these curves. I've done it both ways. So, I don't know. It's 6 1/2, half a dozen any other. You just kind of have to work it out. The longer the piece is, the more cuts you need to make. So, usually like one that's an inch long like this one, I'll cut it twice. I'll make 3 pieces out of it. That seems to work better than trying to do it in just 2 pieces. The other trick is not dropping them when you cut them like this too. And this little tray that I have laying over here is very helpful to put all the loose parts in. It's always nice to have some little tray to put things like these in there, because you will truly lose them and they will just go everywhere. That one looks like it's going to fit up pretty good, so it's difficult to hold them in there tight too while you're gluing them. You want them in there as tight as you can get them while the glue sets up. And I just touch them with the CA glue. Have a very fine nozzle on this CA glue right now, just a glue tip. Then I spritz it as lightly as I can. And the lighter the better, actually, on the spritzing thing. And then that holds it, and then I pick another piece. And I try not to match them up where they look like they're one continuous grain. I like to mix match it all so it just has more action to it. It kind of looks like, if you ask me. I prefer have the colors mix and match rather than just make it look like one piece. And sometimes they go fast, like those 2 pieces went pretty fast. But other times they don't go so fast. Turn this one here where it goes a little different. Although that one there looks like it actually matches up. I think I'll turn it around. Because when they're broken and they match, they look funny actually. It's better if when they're broken to not match. And then you just have different patterns all over the place. Little tiny spout sure is helpful on the CA glue. That definitely helps, though that's not the complete answer either. It still spills quite a bit. And then every so often, as I get a bunch of pieces on there, I take this little file and I go around them and try to get their corners, to match up. Because the corners sometimes will still be sticking out a little bit proud. And the tops are fairly level, but they're not perfect either. So it's going to take some sanding on the top yet after we're done. Yeah, it's just a whole bunch of work. So if you wonder how that kind of inlay gets put in on an instrument, well, now you're seeing it. It's not a piece of cake. It's definitely a lot of work.